And finally, the last objection I'm going to address in this video is Romans chapter 7. This is often pointed to by people to say, look, this is part of the Christian lifestyle. Paul was even a sinner. He was committing, all these sins. This is proof that we will always struggle with sin as a Christian. And so in here in Romans 7, we have verses like, for we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. They're like, look, he's using present tense language here. And for the good that I would, I do not, but the evil which I would not, that I do. See, he's doing things he doesn't want to do. He's struggling, he's fighting his fleshly desires here. And they would also argue that this is talking about a saved Paul in his current state, because why would he war against his flesh if he was, not saved, because unsaved people don't care what they do. But let's break this down. If we go back to Romans chapter 6 here, let's take a look at some of the things Paul said here, and also noting Acts 23:1, and I believe it was 2 Timothy 1:3, where we already read those verses where it says he has pure conscience before God, that he is in a good conscience before God. And so those are already verses conflicting with that interpretation of Romans 7, where it's like, how can he have a pure conscience before God, but then does the things he doesn't want to do? Like, then he wouldn't have a pure conscience before God. So that's confusing. But when you look at Romans 6, the confusion gets even worse. Because in Romans 6:6, he says, knowing this, that our old man is crucified with him, that the body of sin might be destroyed, that henceforth we should not serve sin. For he that is dead is freed from sin. Verse 12 here, he says, let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body, that you should obey it in the lust thereof. So sin should not reign in your mortal body, and you shouldn't obey its lusts. Here in verse 14, sin will not have dominion over you. Verse 16, he says, know ye not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, his servants ye are to whom you obey, whether of sin unto death or of obedience unto righteousness. But God be thanked that ye were the servants of sin, but ye have obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine which was delivered you. Being then made free from sin, ye became the servants of righteousness. So you are a slave to who you obey. You're a servant to who you obey. If you obey sin, that's your servant. If you obey God, you're serving him. And also, just keep in mind the words of Jesus, no one can serve two masters. So who do you obey? What fruit are you going to bear? And in verse 17 and 18, who he's writing to, that ye were the servants of sin. You were obeying sin, but you obeyed from the heart that form of doctrine delivered to you, free from sin, servants of righteousness, which means they were living righteously. In verse 22 here, but now being made free from sin and become servants to God, you have your fruit unto holiness and the end everlasting life. Their fruit of obedience. They're bearing good fruit, good works. They are living a life that's pleasing to God. And so you have all these passages that Paul's writing here about being free from sin. We're not obeying its lusts, no dominion over you. You're a slave to whom you obey. Like, this is all indicating holiness here. And it's in such conflict with the interpretation of Romans 7 that Paul is this sinner. And let's actually look at what Paul describes himself in Romans 7. In verse 14, if we're just looking at verse 14, not reading anything else before that might be written that could help us. For we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold under sin. So last passage, we're free from sin. We're not a slave to sin or a servant of sin, but yet Paul's sold under sin. Like, that's such conflict. Free from sin, but sold. Are we free or sold from sin? Because he just said we were free from sin, and here he's saying he's sold under sin. We're not a servant or slave to sin, but we're sold under sin. Like, you see that conflict. And then this carnal talk I find really interesting, because literally in the next chapter here in verse 8, he says the carnal mind, for to be carnally minded is death, in verse 6 here. So the carnal mind is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace, because the carnal mind is enmity against God. It's that conflict. So if Paul's describing himself as carnal and the carnal minded is death, that's very confusing. Again, both chapter 8 and chapter 6 are indicating that this is not talking about a saved Paul. And if we actually look back at Romans 7, we see him talking about when he was alive without the law once. He is talking about a previous experience in the present tense. Just like you would tell a story to someone where it's like, so last week I went into the store and I picked up a banana and someone came up and said, "Your shoes look lame." And I walked away sad and said, "I wish I could have new shoes." Like I'm using present tense words, but the context is I'm talking about a past experience. And you have to read the beginning in order to understand what he's saying. If someone just walked in on the conversation, they think this was going on right now without that previous context. And if you actually take the time to go through some of these different commentaries out there on the passages in Romans 7, you'll see there's a lot of people who fight against Romans 7 and believing that this is somehow talking about a saved Paul. He said he had pure conscience in other passages. Romans 6, he was very against being under sin and having dominion over you, obeying its lusts. And then here, he's giving into the flesh. He's giving into those fleshly desires. In Galatians, what happens if you fulfill the works of the flesh? You will not inherit the kingdom of God. And so I think it's very clear Paul is not saying these things as if he's still carnally minded, as if he's still sold under sin. It's very clearly he's talking about it. And some would say, oh, well, then why do you have conviction? The world has conviction. I think I brought this up earlier. Like if someone murders someone, they have conviction. If they lie, if they steal, they have conviction because they have a conscience. They know right from wrong. They feel guilty without ever knowing it or without even potentially reading the Bible because the laws are written on their heart. They know right from wrong. They have knowledge of good and evil. So I don't think that's even a strong argument to kind of indicate that Paul was saved here.